Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Mm, Turn me around. Hey, turn me around. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, marching up the freedom road. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, walking up the freedom road. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. Hey, turn me around. Yeah, turn me around. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, marching up the freedom road. Ain't gonna let the administration turn me around, turn me around, yeah, turn me around. I ain't gonna let the administration turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, marching up the freedom road. Ain't gonna let racism turn me around, turn me around. Turn me around. Ain't gonna let this nasty racism turn me around. Gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, marching up the freedom road. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. We're gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, marching up the freedom road. Now this is you all. We're gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, marching up the freedom road. Last time. We're gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, marching up the freedom road. I'm finished. I'm gonna sit back down. Okay. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Today we're going to be talking about Principle 4 in the series that Pastor Tracy has asked us to speak from, and this is in terms of the principles of nonviolence. I must confess, when she gave me the timeline for the message today, I said, well, usually that timeline is my song, my opening song, so we'll try to cut this in about half and be finished in a few minutes, okay? Principle 4, nonviolence holds that unearned voluntary suffering for a just cause can educate and transform people and societies. It seeks to defeat injustice, systems of injustice, not people. Matthew 5:38, verse through 42, which we looked at concerning retaliation. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. It's good to be with you this morning, and I have to be honest with you. Pastor Tracy has left me with a tough assignment. How do you turn your cheek when it seems like the world is slapping you harder than it ever has? It is clear that folks like Dr. King had a calling and a control that may or may not be of this world. There is a tension in this message that leads us to a possible debate. We have scripture and some incredible people who have spoken of and have utilized nonviolence as a strategy for their lifetimes. And in doing so, found many people who followed the path. Would that also be you this morning, my brothers and my sisters? Pastor Tracy told me that I could also bring in the critique into this message. And so the other side of this idea of nonviolence is as follows. Nonviolence has lost the debate. Over the last 20 years, more and more social movements and rebellions against oppression and exploitation have broken out across the world. And within these movements, people have learned all over again that nonviolence does not work. They're learning that the histories of purported nonviolent victories have been falsified, that specific actions or methods that could be described as nonviolent work best when they're complemented by other actions or methods that are illegal and combative. They're learning that exclusive, dogmatic nonviolence does not stand a chance at achieving a revolutionary change in a society, at getting to the roots of oppression and exploitation, and bringing down those who are in power. At best, nonviolence can oblige power to change its mask. I love this part of this critique. Sometimes it seems like racism and oppression and many different things have just simply changed the mask and morphed into a different form of expression to put a new political party on the throne and possibly expand the social sectors that are represented in the elite, without changing the fundamental fact that there is an elite that rules and benefits from the exploitation of everybody else. And if we look at all the major rebellions of the last 2 decades since the end of the Cold War, it seems that nonviolence can only affect this cosmetic change if it has the support of a broad band of the elite, usually the media, the wealthy, at least a part of the military, because nonviolent resistance has never been able to resist the full force of the state. When dissidents do seem to have this elite support, strict nonviolence seems like the surest way to kill a movement, as when pure nonviolence led to the total collapse of the anti-war movement. The claims of many pacifists our society teaches us that while violence may be acceptable for governments, people on the bottom who wish to change things must ultimately give in. This has been a collective learning process that has taken place around the globe. And the direction of this process has overwhelmingly gone from nonviolence to a diversity of tactics. The idea that we cannot impose a limitation of tactics on one method or struggle on an entire movement. That we need to be able to choose from a wide range of tactics. That struggles are more robust when such a variety of tactics are present. And that everybody needs to decide for themselves how to struggle. Peaceful tactics, therefore, are included within a variety of tactics, where nonviolence excludes all other tactics and methods. 8 years ago, there were frequent debates between proponents of nonviolence and proponents of a diversity of tactics. At that time, proponents of nonviolence frequently emerged from their ivory towers to debate with proponents of a diversity of tactics. But in the intervening years, something has changed. Insurrections have occurred around the world, while nonviolent movements have proven themselves stillborn or morally bankrupt. So that would be the critique side. Let's try to get to the core of this scripture. This word today. Sometimes when you suffer, you can almost endure because you know that you've done something that you deserve, or at least you felt that you did, so you rationalize the suffering. But when you have to go through something and you know that you're innocent, that is a whole nother story. Perhaps the secret of this is to understand that when the cause is right, the suffering is worth it. Let me say that again. When the cause is right, the suffering is worth it. What is your cause? And is it the right one? You can probably look at me and realize that I have a few stories to tell. When I was preparing for today, my mind went back to growing up in a segregated Commonwealth of Virginia. Yes, it was the days of Dr. King. And in the midst of the civil rights struggle, there were a lot of places that my family could not go simply because the color of our skin. And a lot of my memories from those days are characterized by what we could not do. An example would be growing up as a child. I remember so vividly, we had a local drive-in theater in my county. And I remember my mother and my father would take me and my brother to the drive-in theater. And I use this as an example because to me it's so profound at the evil of segregation and racism. We were in a car, keep in mind, going to a drive-in movie. But there were two entrances to the drive-in, one for whites and one for coloreds. We couldn't even be in our cars in the same space. There was a corrugated fence that literally went down the middle of the grassy area where the cars would park. We'd be on one side, they would be on the other side. And even as a child, I would remember my family going from speaker to speaker to find the speaker that would work because so many of the speakers on our side were broken. They were tattered. And there was a little concession stand in the middle of the green area that cars would be parked on. And I remember we would just stand there, and once all the whites had been served on the other side of the concession stand, somebody would finally look at us and say, "What do you want?" I remember going to the Shoney's Big Boy. And today we call these things trauma. And I remember my mother taking my brother and I to the nearby city where we, at that time, would think things were just a little bit better in terms of segregation and racism. And we went to this city. Some of you may have heard of this city in Virginia, Newport News, Virginia, next to Norfolk, Virginia Beach. That's where I grew up. And we had been out shopping because that's where we would go to the nearby city to do our shopping, etc. And we were looking forward to our hamburgers and milkshakes and fries from Shoney's Big Boy. We went in and made our order. And when it came time to get our food, my mother took us to a booth to sit down. And a waitress comes to our little booth and she says, "You all can't sit here." And my mother said, "What do you mean?" My mother was a school teacher, so she didn't take a lot of nonsense. And so she said, the waitress said, "We don't let niggers eat inside here." And my mother took the food, slammed it on the table, and she said, "If we can't eat here, we won't eat anywhere." Now, of course, me and my brother got in the car and we had a complete tantrum. We were screaming, we were hollering, we were crying, because we wanted our burgers and fries and milkshake. And my mother turned around in the car and she said, "We are children of God. And if we can't eat inside, we won't eat anywhere. We'll eat when we get back home." And many, many, many decades later, I still remember those stories of my childhood, just as vividly as I remember the struggle of so many people that marched, that protested, that set in so that those things could change. I want you to know that people oftentimes think, and that's why I tell these stories sometimes, when I teach students at the university, they think, "Oh, all of that stuff we read about the civil rights, that must have been centuries ago." No, 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 no. It was in our lifetime. And many of the vestiges of that are still alive and well. They have morphed, as I said earlier, into different masks and different manifestations. But I'm also here to tell you, you never get over it. You never quite get over it. Nonviolence has been shown empirically to be twice as effective in achieving major political goals. So despite the critique of nonviolence, there is a benefit. Maybe Jesus, as well as Dr. King, were onto something. The 4 steps of nonviolent resistance are: collect the facts, know what you're dealing with, determine if there are injustices, don't go by a feeling, get the facts. Negotiation, try to reach an agreement. Number 3, self-purification, examine and improve yourself. This is my favorite one. Look at yourself. Are you part of the problem? Or are you a part of the solution? Number 4, direct action. Take action to address injustices. Hopefully, this series will lead to action. The church was active in the civil rights movement. In many respects, it was ground zero for the struggle. What has happened to the church today? Have we gone to sleep? Or have we taken an extended coffee break? I know sometimes we almost wonder if there's anything we can do. The life, the world, the culture, it seems so off the rails. But we are the church. And with the Lord, there is nothing impossible. I want to make this one point if you don't get anything else out of these comments today. Nonviolence does not mean to get slapped and just stare back. You can still do something and be nonviolent. In the civil rights movement, people spoke up. They sat in. They protested. They used the courts. And they sang the songs of freedom. We shall overcome. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm marching up the freedom road. They didn't just say, slap me and I'm gonna turn the other cheek. Ask for my coat and I'll give you my cloak. They didn't just sit there and say, well, Jesus said, just turn the other cheek. They said, well, while I'm turning this, see, I'm not from the Methodist church. I better try to calm down. But while I'm turning the other cheek, let me go back over here because y'all might say, Pastor Tracy, where did that fool come from? But see, while I'm turning the other cheek, I can still do something. I don't know if y'all do this over here, but just look at your neighbor. If you got a neighbor, say, neighbor, while you're turning the other cheek, you can still do something. Did you hear what I said? You can protest. You can stand up. I teach at Missouri State. I hope nobody else, I saw somebody with a bear sweatshirt on. I hope nobody else knows anything about Missouri State, but about a week and a half ago, we got an email. Y'all saw it in the news. The stuff had just been changed overnight. Anybody do anything? You elected these folks. We elected them. Did you call them? Did you write them? Did you go sit in? Did you go protest? Did you march? Let me just calm down and just get back to my comments here. Nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. Remember, we're dealing with the issues. Nonviolence believes that suffering can educate and transform. Nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. Nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. Do you believe that? Teaching nonviolence can understand racism, said Dr. Collier, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Psychology at the University of Rhode Island. Racism is learned by individuals, both directly and indirectly, and it's reinforced by the American culture of violence. We'll be fooling ourselves to think that we're not a violent society. And it's not just a few bad apples as we often try to pretend. Oftentimes when these horrible things take place in our society, say, well, you know, this is not indicative of our community. This is just a bad apple. But I'm going to tell you this morning, it's not just a few bad apples. Bad apples come from a tree. We need to look at the tree and say, what's wrong with the tree? In his research, Collier pointed out some of the factors that support violence within the American culture. Factions, segregations, hierarchies, and others. The pervasiveness of violence starts to come into focus when we start to consider how many things support and strengthen it. I moved here from Chicago to the Ozarks. I know I'm going to get in trouble when I say this, but I've never seen so many guns in all my life. I'm going to say. I'm not saying I'm not against hunting. I'm not against hunting day. But why so many guns? That's all I'm going to say. I never have shot a gun. Now, when I was a scout, I learned how to shoot one for my little scouting merit badge. But I've never quite seen the need for it. People rely on nonviolent decision-making every day, Collier pointed out. We depend on it for our survival, but nonviolence is taken for granted. As a nonviolence educator, he teaches courses that delve into the psychology of violence and nonviolence. I'm almost finished. I think of what I do as primary prevention, he said. trying to inoculate young people against racism, violence, and corruption. Studying nonviolence, I think this is important, helps us to see other people as brothers and sisters. You are my brothers and my sisters. They see that other people are more similar to themselves than they had thought, and that they see there's more of a possibility of finding common ground, even with people who are very different. Gami noted that the concept of nonviolence in American culture is unnatural. You have to be taught that it's a good thing, but it doesn't come naturally. This is important to realize. It is not what comes naturally. Someone slaps you, you want to slap them back. Praise God for the children's time, but sometimes you watch little children. One would punch one and the other one punch them back. It's somewhat in our little bit of a nature. During his presentation, Collier said that many of his students expressed a desire for nonviolence to be taught in elementary, middle, or high school so they can learn the concepts before they reach college. He said violence is a sign that somebody failed. Interesting. Violence is a sign something has failed. Sometimes the failure occurs with the person who committed the act of violence, while other times the failure exists somewhere in society. Roberts gave the example of a black man getting into an elevator with a white woman, and the pressure the man feels to change his body language so he appears as non-threatening as possible. Been there, done that myself. In that case, he's engaging in deep violence upon himself. Roberts said, he pointed out that this is an example of violence toward the self is also a failure, even though it's not the failure of the man in this scenario. Nonviolent strategies are often used in struggles against racism. But he urged caution coming to conclusions about the intent of activists during the civil rights movement. He actually said, I don't know whether most of the people who became involved in the sit-ins and freedom rides were drawn by their commitment to nonviolent struggle, but rather, he said, I think to some degree, they were committed to doing whatever would work in the South during that time, whatever would give us a chance to sit at Shoney's during that time, whatever would give us a chance to sit in the drive-thru and park our car wherever we wanted. He emphasized the importance of learning from both the participants and the movements, including the anti-racist movement that is going on now. He said he expects new ideas to arise from the current movement that address problems people are living through now. People who have taken the lead in the current struggles are dealing with very systematic kinds of oppression that are maintained by force. I'll let you read between the lines. Noting the systemic oppression of Black, African American communities and others. At the end of his life, Dr. King himself wrote in the book, Where Do We Go From Here? And I think that's still an unanswered question. It's still not clear where we're going. For myself, I say this, I might turn the other cheek, but I'm going to keep my eyes open, my brain engaged, and my prayers going to heaven. Dr. King said this, Dr. King, since we're studying his principles, let us say boldly that if the violations of law by the white man in the slums over the years were calculated and compared with the law breaking of a few days of ride, this is after the riots in the 60s, the hardened criminal would be the white man. These are often difficult things to say, but I have come to see more and more that it's necessary to utter the truth in order to deal with the great problems that we face in our society. Now, that was our beloved Dr. King. Many would say, just before the end of his life, he was beginning to morph a little bit in terms of his teachings and his views because he saw how ingrained the violence and the racism was in our nation. It is violent to take that which does not belong to you for the thrill of, even briefly, imagining yourself on even ground with the oppressor. Then King was concluding that there was to be no hope for nonviolence. Perhaps not then, perhaps not ever. Martin Luther King, at the end of his life, was coming to understand the restrictions of nonviolence as a weapon against a violent oppressor who shows no moral compass. There are limits to how long one can attempt to quiet a fire. King's transition from the summer of 1966 to the summer of 1967 was from hoping against violence to accepting it as a function of the society it operated in. As an inevitability for a people he had led to a promised land that did not deliver on its promise. Interesting. Nonviolence, as it is discussed and fetishized in proximity to the poor or the marginalized, is so often only dragged out in the response to the uprising of those people. So I might conclude today by saying the following. The verdict might still be out. Violence, is that the answer? I would say strongly no. Is nonviolence the answer? I would say this. I really hope it is. Jesus said, if somebody slaps you, turn the other cheek. I still believe in turning the other cheek. But I will say this. Don't just sit there. Don't just stand there. Don't just be there. But find the actions you can do in peace and in love and in Christ-like behavior to change a world that needs the love of God today more than it ever has. We can be nonviolent, but we must take action. Take action, we must. The Lord bless each of you, and the Lord keep us.